Welcome to Bring the World Home, a production of the Returned Peace Corps Volunteers of Hawaii. My name is Chip Tilton. I served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Malaysia from 1966 to 1968, and I will be your host for today's program. In this program, we will be sharing with you one Peace Corps volunteer's experiences from abroad. Hopefully, our messages of friendship and family with people of all countries and cultures is exhibited in each of our shows. With us today is Craig Coulette, who served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Sierra Leone from 1991 to 1993. Welcome, Craig.
Hi.
I'm glad you could join us.
Thanks, Chip.
Am I pronouncing your name correctly, or is it more of a French pronunciation?
It is Clouet, but I grew up with Clouette, so I'm used to that.
Excuse me. Craig, we're here in the Pacific, out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean in Hawaii, and where you served in Sierra Leone is in Western Africa, all the way across the ocean, across the other side of the world. Sierra Leone is a country on the west coast of Africa between what, Guyana and Liberia, is that?
Guinea in Liberia.
Guinea,
Yeah,
okay.
Surrounded by the two.
And it's an area that I'm familiar with from the news, and in recent history there's been a lot of strife and conflict going on there.
Sure.
Back in 1991, tell us a little bit about your transition from an American citizen to a Peace Corps volunteer in Sierra Leone. You were a college student
Sure.
in that era, studying what?
I just had finished studying geography and a little bit of geology from San Diego State University when I applied earlier in April, not knowing what to do, like many students, and I got the call in August that same year. And so we flew, like our stage, they call it, a group into Washington, D.C., got the first round of shots, and next day we were on our way to Paris and then flew off to Africa, and we landed in Freetown, the capital of Sierra Leone. And at that point, of course, we didn't know anything about it. We were all pretty green, but we were driven, we got there at night and they threw us in the back of trucks, drove us up these dark, bumpy roads for hours and hours up to our first training site, which was in McKinney in the north.
Sounds like a military action almost.
It's pretty traumatic.
Yeah.
My friend, the first thing he did is walk into our hole, fell in a well, and he was pretty shaken up the first night, but the rest of us did fine, and later on we all took care.
How many people were in your group that went to
we were
Sierra
just behind the
Leone?
education group, which had come earlier. So the education was about 40 had come in, and then us in agriculture came in about 20. And it was broken up a little bit between the forestry and then some smaller agriculture. And so, but we basically trained together as about 20 of us. And education had just left the camp. We overlapped probably about 2 weeks because they had to get ready for school, and so we came in a little bit later so we can take over the camp. And
I see.
so we stayed for 3 months in the camp.
Well, Craig, one of the missions of this program, Bring the World Home, is community service. In fact, we just were recognized as providing outstanding community programming with the award of the Leray Miller Rupe Award. And what we try to do with our conversations is tell people a little bit about what return volunteers are bringing back to the United States, but also to try and encourage our viewers to be stimulated to join the Peace Corps, at least explore what the Peace Corps might be about,
Sure.
Whether or not they proceed to become volunteers. I'd like to go back a little bit. As a student, how did you become interested in service? Did you have a history of service or volunteer service?
Not really. It was more somewhat on more professional side. I looked at it is that I learned all about the physical earth and geography and the soils and rainfall and some things about people around the world and geography and geology. So I wanted to kind of use my skills, and I did like to travel, so I thought that would be a perfect match. And
Peace Corps was recruiting on campus? Or
yep, they had come to campus and had the booth like usual, and they came in, and I'd always kind of thought about it being something kind of adventurous sounding. And again, you know, the ability to use my skills. And I thought I'd be actually going to a French-speaking country because I had learned some languages. I had traveled before and been in France, did some French language, and then countries around me were French-speaking, but I ended up in an English-speaking country.
And then you had said you were in an agricultural program. Did you, when you were recruited and approved as a volunteer, Were you told at that time, at that point, what kind of service you might be performing?
Yes, I was. When I called, the first thing they said is what country it was and what program it was, and I had to accept. And at first, I didn't even know where Sierra Leone was, even as a geographer. But I found that out quickly. And then the forestry worked out really good because I had worked for many years in botanical garden and greenhouses, and that kind of line of work. But then also with the geography, we studied things like soil and world climate and world vegetation.
Mm-hmm.
So it made sense to me.
Well, it sounds like a good match between your background and preparedness in college to the assignment that you ended up doing. But when you, one of the things that's usually of interest to our viewers is your expectation of what you thought the country was about, what the people might be like, and what did you find when you arrived there? You arrived there and began a training program that lasted about how long?
3 months, and it was in kind of a large camp that was unfortunately it was walled off, but I think it was just because we had bought it from another organization. But I guess in retrospect we needed it because it was quite a shock. It was going from white America for me to black Africa, and we were up north where it was very rural and no running water, no electricity. We had generators, of course, on the campus, but even the food right away was completely rice every day. It was the first time they ate rice every day, like here in Hawaii, so it was the first time for me. And they had these sauces, and everything was spicy, and everything was different. And so it took definitely some getting used to right away.
And did you serve the whole 2 years there, basically?
Yeah, actually it was
a typical assignment.
It was typical, except for Sierra Leone was under a lot of political upheaval, and so the first year I was there, it was quite normal, and then in fact we had a coup d'etat, which forced the evacuation of the entire Peace Corps operations there, and that was after 1 full year. And we were flown to Senegal, which is up north, by the U.S. government. They came in with military planes actually and took us out. They picked us all up, and everybody was president accounted for, and just for safety. They weren't sure what was going on with this new coup. So
I'd like to come back to that, but
sure.
my question in asking, did you serve the full 2 years? You were starting to say how it was quite different from your life to that point, and this is kind of a typical initial experience for a lot of volunteers. And if you of your group that arrived, did a lot of people besides yourself make the full 2 years, or was it?
I'd say just over half, actually, because it was that hard. Either some people for medical reasons couldn't take it, or they had problems with the emotional, being away from home for the first time or whatever. And it was very, very difficult. In I was lucky that I was kind of on the main road, so I could have access to lukewarm drinks or whatever. But a lot of my friends we called it the bush. They were off, and at this time we weren't allowed motorcycles anymore, so we had bicycles, mountain bikes. And so some people were literally 10 or 20 miles into the bush on a little dirt road and their little village.
By a bicycle.
So they would be in there for quite a while. And so yeah, it was I had access. I could thumb a ride or whatever, and go to the capital once in a while, or go to the main city. It was luckily only 10 miles away to the main regional capital, so I could bike in there and meet up with other people, which was quite fortunate. While other people had it much harder in some ways to.
And then after your 3 months training, you, I'm sure, was given more background on exactly what your assignment would be. Tell us a little bit about that. What exactly did you do? What was a day in your life or a week in your life like?
Yeah, it was fun because in agriculture it was completely different than most 9-to-5 type jobs. Even the school teachers in Sierra Leone obviously had to go to work every day, Monday through Friday type work, whereas agriculture was completely different. I was a field extension agent, so my job was to go out and talk to farmers and local people. And then because I didn't realize this right away, but they have a very heavy agricultural season. So they have times when they're doing specific work, and they have times when they're not. And so all the way up until September, they're working very hard. And then when they harvest, after that for about 3 months, they kind of take off. So that became my work schedule more, because they wouldn't think about planting right after harvest. They'd think about eating. And then early on, like around Christmas time, is when they started clearing the bush, where they'd go in and cut all the forest down and burn it by February after it dried a little bit, and then planting the rice. And so my job was to be there at the right times, because to plant these trees had to fit in with their agricultural season. They were growing mainly rice. And so we had to have the nursery. At one point I was working on a nursery, so we had to have the nursery trees ready so that when they planted the rice, we would plant the trees at the same time because we were trying to mix the two, planting trees and regular eating crops and then these tree crops at the same time, so that when you harvest the rice, come back in a couple of years and then you can start harvesting these trees and again plant your rice instead of.
And in talking to the farmers, you're trying to get them to plant trees, and they want a subsistent or a food crop. Are the trees that you're planting for just general reforestation, or what was the nature of
Most of the trees we planted were fast-growing, nitrogen-fixing trees for the purpose of fuel wood, which is funny because even in Africa, this part of Africa, everybody cooked on wood. There was occasionally coal, but most of the charcoal was made by charcoaling the wood. Actually, they do that in the village. Even in the capital, they would mostly cook because it was cheap and abundant relatively. So, and then the funny thing was the fuel that they would do was considered women's work. And so the women liked it because that's how they made cash money.
Right.
They would go and bundle up little bits of wood and that would be worth, a couple cents to us, but to them a lot of cash crop money because they would be provided things like rice from their husband in the farming and the potatoes and all the staples. But it's little things like the tins of peppers or salt or the usual things you have to buy from the city people that they wanted the cash crop from.
And that was, and those kinds of things were on a cash basis, or did they have any kind of barter that was still?
They would barter,
operating?
but mostly it was mostly a cash economy at this point. And everybody where I
that's
was
very
up there, but it's subsistence. So you had to grow your own food as far as you grew your own rice. You had, of course, your live chickens and your maybe a goat or sheep, and that would, because they had no refrigeration. So of course, it had to be live until the time you needed to eat it.
Right.
And yeah, otherwise they'd smoke little fish that they'd get in the streams and stuff like that.
Let's go back now to your assignment itself. Was this directed? Who wanted forestry workers?
Originally, it was a program that was started by the United Nations, FAO, Food and Agriculture Association. And so they started this a couple years before I'd gotten there, and Peace Corps was working with them. But then by the time I had gotten there, they had pulled out or changed the course of the program. So I was doing it at a little more smaller scale, just with a few select farmers. But it was, they not only did they get the fast-growing trees, we also did provide them with hybrids of like oil palms, which were important cash crops, or mangoes, or oranges, tangerines, or even some hardwoods like mahogany or teak. Because that was, again, boards, even when they cut the big trees, you could sell them for good cash crop money or build your own house, so you had a choice. And so we encouraged people even to line the roads with the trees that could be used later on for money, not just fuel to be cut down.
And how was that accepted by the?
It was a hit or miss.
people
We
of
had
the area?
people who were very Akamai ready for it. And so that was easier for me. I just could work with a few people being on a bicycle and all in the local village. So I had to pick about 5 or 6 farmers who actually were really interested and would really follow through, because it was a lot of work. You had to plant the seedlings and clear the land and weed and keep at it. And then I worked at a nursery too, so we did produce over 300,000 seedlings. And a couple of the bigger farmers, we would go out with trucks and actually bring over thousands of trees, and we'd help them plant the trees in a large scale like that.
And they, you make it sound very easy to accomplish, but I'm sure it was quite a challenge. What was some of the personal challenge for you in trying to implement this program? What I'm hearing is that this originally was a UN program. Did you have a specific guidelines, or you had to kind of figure out on your own how to go about getting the farmer on your side and willing to work with you? And then
it was kind of half and half, because originally they had been trained. The FAO would come in with some guys and help out, but towards the end where I was there, it was more me doing it with some other groups. So it was.
Did you feel let down by Peace Corps, or did you
No.
feel emboldened that hey, I'm here and I'm in charge and I can do?
It was small scale and it worked because I was in a small community, so that it was fine like that. And everybody knew what I was doing, so it was interesting. So even the farmers who didn't necessarily take it right away were always looking at what we were doing with the farmers who would,
Sure.
and see what was going on. So I think, and it's something like this, trees grow slow, so does the mentality to plant them and the reasoning behind it. It's not a cash crop immediately. So I think it was going to take a while no matter how you do it. You can't force people to plant certain ways. They've been doing it for thousands of years, and they're subsistence farmers, and they can produce for their family, and they do. And so I quickly learned anyway that it was a mistake to try to tell them how to do things. It was to show them different ways to do things. And it was better for me to get a few good farmers who would do a good job, and then their neighbors could come and look at them instead of coming and look at me, who I knew I'd be away in several years.
Yeah.
So I think it was better that way.
And then now you had mentioned earlier that conflict was developing at this time. How was that impacting your job at this point? Let's say chronologically, we're now maybe about a year, or almost a year into your first year of service. Was the conflict starting at that point, or was already going? And
it was unfortunately, it's a twofold problem. There was on the Eastern Front, there was some rebel activity, and it's not a political civil war by any means. It was really a rebel activity of funded kind of thugs who had guns, and it was because there was diamonds in the East, and they were getting control of these diamond fields, which really was the moneymaker in Sierra Leone. And then at the same time, the government was kind of, let's say, corrupt, and got overthrown, so there was a coup d'etat. So now we had terrible troubles of both rebel war and a coup d'etat. So the government was destabilized. The Peace Corps was pulled out for 3 months. I was allowed to return. And in that time, the rebels kept going back and forth. But actually, I stayed for another year. And then within 2 years, the rebels had actually taken over the capital and caused serious damage. And the government had fallen at least 2 or 3 times since then. So it's been
and the people that you were working with on a regular basis, were they a part of this conflict, or they were innocent bystanders like yourself, or?
They were definitely innocent bystanders in the section I was in. Even one day I remember hearing of an attack about 20 miles from my village that the rebels had overtaken this kind of large city. And then, I was worried, but they didn't seem that bad. But 2 or 3 days later, I wake up and I was on my way to work, and I saw all these people walking down the street carrying all this stuff on their heads and carrying their kids. And at first it dawned on me, what are they doing? Where are they going? Why is everybody coming down the street? And then I realized they'd been walking for 3 days, carrying whatever they could, and they were coming from that area of the country. And that's when it really started to dawn on me. As the rebels got closer and things got worse, there was military all over, checkpoints all over, and so it was.
And were the so the people that you worked with, were they concerned about your safety as well as their own, or did you feel kind of alone as a outsider, as a foreigner?
No, I was definitely very well liked in my village. They very much liked Americans, and you have to be personable there because there's nothing else to do but hang out and talk with people.
Yes.
And so that's all we did. Like at night, you would just get back together with your friends and sit around, and at work we were out talking about. So it was a very social society, very much the aloha spirit, even though it's an African place. They were very friendly people, and they'd always take care of me no matter what.
What kinds of things would you talk about? And can you give our viewers a little idea of the patois that you
I can't speak it much anymore. Luckily I was in like I say, an English-speaking colony, so the language was called Creole, the common language. It was about 8 major tribes, so everybody had a very different African language. But this Creole is based on English, much like Pidgin is here in Hawaii. But instead of Pidgin taking language from the Asians or from Hawaiians, they took it from their different tribal languages.
Sure.
And so some of the words, or the way they broke English up, was the way they would speak it in African. So it was very interesting. And then that helped me get by quite a bit, having a little basis in English.
And you had close friends or just associates that you work with? How would you characterize your relationship with them?
Very close friends, and they made sure that they would definitely come right over to your house and sit down. We had porches like here, and it was definitely, and I had through work or other ways, just definitely people I'd hung out with more than other ones. But yeah, even people at work were just the nicest, friendliest people, and it was easy to get along. And when you're in a village, you really have no choice. Your neighbor is your neighbor, and so. But there, they would go out of their way, of course, to take care of me. Or
were they had they been exposed to foreigners of any ilk in the village that you were?
Yeah, they had. The difference with the Peace Corps, which is really a good part, is that you're there in the village, whereas a lot of the other foreigners who come from either USAID, the higher American ones, or even the missionaries or the Europeans, a lot of times would come in their big trucks, they rent out the big houses up on the hill, kind of in the compound mentality. Whereas at the Peace Corps, the best part was you were in the village. I was completely with the neighbors, and my food, for example, I didn't cook the African food, but my neighbor every day, I just give him a little bit of money, and they'd always bring food over just like they would for their father or the family. I was treated just like when the big men of the village. So that part was very nice, to have that connectivity.
Very satisfying.
Yeah.
Well, do you still have contact with anybody from that era, from that
I
time?
do a little bit, just with actually some other return volunteers, but because of the political instability, Actually, the only person I've known who's gone back went back with Doctors Without Frontiers. I mean, it was that bad that they're the only people who would even go there. And so, no, I know, for example, that this person who had gone back and said the village I lived in actually had been blown up and overrun. And so I haven't been back yet. I think I'll wait a few years until it gets a little better.
How did you feel when you heard what was going on and what had happened?
This is unbelievable because, I mean, these people are some of the poorest in the world. They get $300 a year per capita income. And I was there, I saw, I mean, they were really living off just a machete and a hoe, and they fed their whole family, and they lived just barely, and they'd make their own house. Everything they had, they made, and they took care of themselves. And to have someone come and burn down your house and cut off your hands or your arms, like you might have read, it's just amazing that people would sink so low to hurt people like that.
Pretty disheartening to think that the work that you're trying to do is such a humanitarian kind of effort, and then to have these terrible conflicts occur. Can you share with our viewers what you feel you've brought back from Sierra Leone to your life today?
I learned an amazing amount. Just to be in such a place where every day was a challenge. The littlest thing was new or wild. I mean, I went into the bathroom to be like a poisonous snake, or once I got attacked by army ants. So you come home here and like everything's easy. It's kind of nice.
I want to hear about the army ant experience. Can you?
That was funny. We
got a few minutes to
all right.
talk
So I was
about
in
that.
bed in my mud hut, basically. It was a nice mud hut with a tin roof. But I had a mosquito net, of course, from malaria. It was a very big problem there.
Right.
And I remember waking up and hearing this very strange sound, like crumpling of paper. I was looking, and it was dark. Of course, I didn't know what was going on. Finally, I said, I have to know what this noise is, so I turned the light on, and my whole mosquito net was covered with ants. And I knew they were army ants. And luckily, I remembered, I don't know how, but I had a can of spray underneath the bed, and I jumped out, sprayed them all, and then I went outside to look with my little can of spray, thinking, oh, I'll get these guys. And the entire, looked like the entire village was covered with ants. So I quickly went back to my room and closed the door, and luckily where I sprayed the whole, they stayed out, so I was safe.
Oh my.
Yeah.
That's sounds like something out of a science fiction movie. So kind of wrap that up for us. Did they leave of their own volition?
Oh, sure. They'd come and go. They were great. You'd see them all the time in little trails. Even at work, you just step over them. But occasionally when they did come, they supposed to have these crazy stories about eating chickens alive or prisoners in prison. So I'd always heard those stories. I'm not sure if it's true or not, but didn't get me.
So they weren't usually biting people unless you got
you
in
never
their
got
way.
in their way. They were like rivers of ants. You never seen anything like it. And they would just go and go. And for fun, I'd put at work, just put a little stick in front of them, and they'd kind of go around or move the stick. But no, you would never go near those things.
Yeah. And then, so the other side of the coin, you describe how it's impacted your life today. What's your feeling about what you brought to those people?
For an American, and they realize this, to come and just sit down on their little sticks in their mud village and drink from their same cups and share the same food, and to treat them like just regular friends meant a lot to them, I think. And they saw that, and they know I was like leaving my family. They're very family-oriented, so they would know, oh, you're leaving your mom and dad, and they'd always ask about your family and your health. So they really loved it, and to just talk story and to see that we're all exactly the same, men and women, and all that kind of stuff. And hard work, they would watch me work, and they would love to laugh at me because I could never work half as hard or as never as tough as them. But that was very good for them to see that we weren't always jet pilots or astronauts in space. We were just regular people like them. In a lot of ways, they liked to see that they were better than us. Sometimes, that the fact that they were stronger, that made them feel really proud that, okay, we don't have everything in the world. They
Yes.
still have things over us.
Did they have quite a bit of exposure to American culture?
In a very strange way, like they would get clothes from I guess the Salvation Army type clothes that they would send over. So they might have wacky T-shirts or like football team hats and stuff like that. When they had no idea what the New York Giants were or anything like that, but they would wear them and be kind of proud. Like, oh, look, I have this bright red hat, not knowing what it meant or stuff like that. And then have radio, but mostly they liked reggae or the African music. So no, they really didn't like American music that way. But they all loved the idea of America, but didn't really know what it was.
They had some kind of vague understanding. Was there a missionary influence there, or another? Where did this exposure come from?
It's just like shortwave radio, basically, and occasional like a magazine here or there, but they weren't very literate, unfortunately, and so it was
And
just
film or television
very little, because
didn't
again,
exist there.
sometimes people would bring for entertainment a generator and a TV with a video, and it would tour around the villages, and that would be their movie night. But that was few and far between. It really was that remote. That I guess unless you're in a city, and then you could occasionally see. But most of the big cities were still on generator at the time, so it was hit or miss again.
If you had the opportunity to go back into Peace Corps service, would that still be of interest to you?
I
or
definitely would do it again.
where would you like to go? Would you like to return there or someplace else?
It probably doesn't matter, because it's a personal thing, and it's being with people that's the important part. And no matter where you are, as long as you're with other people, that's the fun part of it. And then the work is always going to fall, no matter what you're doing. As long as you work hard at it, you can make some progress. But yeah, being with people and living with them and sharing, that's the exciting part.
And when you tell people today here in Hawaii about your experience, what is their reaction?
Most people are always positive about it, and always say either that they've wanted to do it or have heard somebody who's done it. A lot of people say, oh, either I'm too old for it, which of course is wrong, or it sounds too tough and that they can't deal with no running water. How could people live like that? But it's not a problem.
Yeah. You would encourage people to investigate going into the Peace Corps,
Oh, highly.
being service.
Yes, it's a very good thing. Yeah.
Well, Craig Coulee, we really appreciate your
Chip.
joining us today and talking about Peace Corps. I hope that you've stimulated people to have an interest in service in the Peace Corps in a country somewhere around the world. We invite viewers to contact the Peace Corps at a website or via telephone. They're in the telephone book, and we ask you all to please join us next time that we visit another country and bring the world home.